The only reason the Palestinians want to go back to Gaza is they have no alternative. It's right now a demolition site. This is just a demolition site. Virtually every building is down. They're living under fallen concrete that's very dangerous and very precarious. They instead can occupy all of a beautiful area with homes and safety, and they can live out their lives in peace and harmony instead of having to go back and do it again. The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it, too. We'll own it and be responsible for dismantling all of the dangerous unexploded bombs and other weapons on the site, level the site and get rid of the destroyed buildings, level it out, create an economic development that will supply unlimited numbers of jobs and housing for the people of the area.
Should the U.S. actually send our troops to the Middle East to take over Gaza? I don't know how I can answer this any more clear other than to say, hell no. Hell no. 100% no. 1000% no. Absolutely not. I do not want it. Talking about Greenland actually makes sense. Talking about Gaza being under the control of the U.S. government makes 0 sense. Don't want it. You can keep it. Absolutely not. Keep my soldiers away from it. That is not an America First type of agenda. But with that being said, is it actually good or possibly good strategy for the evil orange man to talk about Gaza being taken from the current governing force, which is Hamas, as a consequence of them losing a war that they absolutely started? Possibly. And that's what I want to talk about today, because the evil orange man has been against the grain in terms of strategy in the Middle East before, and it's resulted in positive things. So today I want to discuss how this actually could be a good idea rhetorically, even though I definitely 100%, let me make this clear to everybody out there in the audience, do not want Gaza. But before we get into that, I will remind you that my friend Devin Tracy, his family lost their home in the California wildfires. He started a GoFundMe in order to get them back up on their feet. If you can donate, please do. If you can't or don't want to because you don't like Devin, that's perfectly fine. I'm just trying to help a friend.
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead.
Afghan suffered women as a high expectation from you. Do you have any plan to change Afghanistan situation? Are you able to recognize Taliban? Because I'm an Afghan journalist, Afghan suffered women. Any comment about Afghanistan? What's your future plan for Afghan people, especially Afghanistan?
I have a little hard time understanding you. Where are you from? Oh. Actually, it's a beautiful voice and a beautiful accent. The only problem is I can't understand a word you're saying. But I just say this, good luck. Live in peace. Go ahead, please.
So as many of you already know, the evil orange man recently did a joint press conference with the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, and during the course of that press conference, he spoke about moving the people that are currently in Gaza out of Gaza to a third-party country or third-party territory so that they can have better lives, and then he talked about the U.S. taking it over and maybe it being an international site where Palestinians could come back to, or some other such nonsense that is getting a lot of attention in the headlines. However, what is getting far less attention from that particular press conference is that just before that, the evil orange man was talking about pressure, not only in the context of Iran, but pressure against Hamas in terms of trying to end that particular conflict once and for all.
Mr. President, what's your view about Palestinian leader Abbas' role in all the regional changes you want to do? And a question for the Prime Minister, what's your view on President Trump wanting to reach a deal with Iran and not a much more active military stance towards them?
Well, I said it, and he said it very well. It's a campaign of pressure to see if we can get something done. He doesn't want to do what some people think will automatically happen because they're very difficult people to deal with, as you know. But if we could solve this problem without warfare, without all of the things that you've been witnessing over the last number of years, it would be, I think it would be a tremendous thing.
Now, it's funny that people both on the right and the left are taking the evil orange man out of context in this regard, removing that talk about pressure and how he actually wants to achieve a goal that is maybe not being outright stated, because typically we would see that just from the left wing. That being said, I think it's important before we go further to explain what the American interest is as of right now in the situation that we're currently in when it comes to Israel and the Middle East, because a lot of people say we should just cut off funding to all these different conflicts, we shouldn't be involved. And while that is something that I hope as an endpoint goal we can achieve, the fact of the matter is cutting off your ally during the middle of a war sends negative signals throughout the world that the US will abandon its allies and thus weakens our ability to form alliances going forward. And the fact of the matter is the evil orange man did not start the alliance with Israel. The evil orange man did not start the war that is currently going on between Hamas and Israel. So we're in this situation already. So the goal should be to not send a message to the world that we will abandon our allies due to pressure campaigns, because that weakens our ability to have allies going forward. And it also encourages people to try to fill the gap, to try to aggress upon the Western world, to try to aggress upon American interests. And that has downstream negative consequences that I would prefer not to deal with. And if you need examples of this totally backfiring in the face of the United States of America, see Barack Obama's red line in Syria. I definitely did not want to be involved in Syria, but the fact of the matter is, once you draw a red line and then show the world that's meaningless, that encourages people to aggress upon U.S. interests even further, and again, our allies even further. In addition to that, we also have the Afghanistan pullout. Again, I didn't want to be in Afghanistan, but once you have an embarrassing pullout where your ally ends up collapsing, which the Afghani government, however corrupt it was technically an ally of the United States within a couple of days, that encourages the world that, again, if you can initiate public pressure against the United States government, they'll back off of their international commitments, and then we could end up in a disaster zone where people continue to transgress. So this, by the way, is the quagmire that we're in the Ukraine, because we encourage them to give up their nuclear stockpile in exchange for security guarantees. And if we want any country to give up their nuclear stockpile in the future, we now are in a situation where we have to actually forward those security guarantees. So essentially, we're in a disastrous zone in a lot of places in the world. We can't quite pull out because that could lead to further disaster, and that's where we are at this moment. And I hate to break it to you guys, but it is not America first to weaken America on the international stage. Again, this is where we are. This is the practical realities. I would like to be involved in all these different foreign conflicts as little as possible, but I'm also a foreign policy realist, and I understand that every action has consequences. Every vacuum created will have been filled by somebody else, and likely somebody we don't like, and that is ultimately going to be obviously disastrous for the US going forward. So to everyone who thinks we should initiate a weapons embargo to our ally after our ally gets attacked, you're absolutely crazy. Obviously, you're holding an anti-American position, and it is a ridiculous position. Now, I'm also going to talk about Israel as if it's a real nation. I'm not one of those weirdo Christians who thinks that Israel needs to be in control of the Jews in order for the Messiah to return or anything of the sort. And I'm also not one of these people who is obsessed with the fact that Israel is a Jewish state. Again, I'm going to talk about it as if it's a normal country. So if you want to write the Jews in the comments, go ahead. Feel free, get that out of your system right now. And in addition to that, I'm also going to discuss the Muslim Arabs in the Gaza territory as if they can be and they should be expected to behave like rational actors, because I think the fact that we never talk about the Middle East and specifically this conflict in this way is absolutely disastrous. So for everybody who's going to say the real war started in 1948 or the real war started in 1967 or whatever date where the Muslim Arabs actually lost the war, I'm going to treat them like they actually are rational adults, the leadership, and they need to accept the fact that they lost those wars. We're not going to rehash everything. A lot of people tend to say we got to talk about the history, TM, because they think that using the history, TM, is perfectly adequate in justifying the ongoing ridiculous behavior from the Arabic Muslim side in terms of this particular conflict. Again, people lose wars all the time, and typically what is normal in the history of the world is that people accept the consequences of their losses rather than just be this ongoing, we never give up, we never acknowledge the fact that we lost, and we continue to fight and die repeatedly and then claim to be victims, even though, again, we're behaving in a way that nobody in the world is expecting. And the reason I want to talk about this conflict in this way is because I believe the number one reason why this conflict is ongoing is that the Israelis fight to essentially manage the Palestinian cause, while the Palestinians, who are weaker than the Israelis, fight to annihilate the Israelis. Now, again, they're much less effective in that goal, obviously, because they're a much weaker power, if you can even call them a power. But the fact of the matter is, this is a way for perpetual conflict. This is not a way for resolution. And because of that, the Israelis have something called Iron Dome. Now, Iron Dome, people talk about how great it is, what a wonderful piece of technology, but what is the actual effect of having Iron Dome in Israel? It mitigates the cost, it mitigates the consequences for the rocket fire into the nation of Israel from its neighbors, which is ridiculous and absurd. I would rather them actually not have Iron Dome and be forced to take out the leadership of Hamas, because as we found out on October 7th, when you don't take the leadership out of an organization that is constantly in perpetual war with you, eventually there's going to be devastating consequences. And this, by the way, is the problem that we're currently in right now, because now Israel is highly incentivized to take out Hamas. In fact, they actually have to do it as a goal, because October 7th was one of the largest terrorist attacks in the history of the world. And again, compared to the population of Israel, it was significantly more devastating in terms of a larger percentage of their population that was killed than on September 11th here in the United States of America. So they have to get rid of the leadership of Hamas, and Hamas's incentive, of course, is to stay in power, and they don't care about civilian casualties. In fact, civilian casualties in Gaza actually help Hamas stay in power, because it ends up bringing up sympathy from all these different places around the world, which ends up increasing pressure on Israel in order to accept that Hamas should stay in power. And this is obviously a complete and utter disaster. And like President Trump said, it hasn't worked for decades.
Everybody feels that continuing the same process that's gone on forever, over and over again, and then it starts, and then the killing starts, and all of the other problems start, and you end up in the same place, and we don't want to see that happen.
And I 100% agree with President Trump in this regard, because the status quo in this particular area of the world is Islamist group attacks Israel. Israel ends up striking back. Obviously, they do more damage because they have a real military. The Islamists claim to be victims. They talk about civilian casualties. The world puts pressure on Israel. They agree to a ceasefire, rinse and repeat. Nothing changes. The status quo is always unharmed, and that's why we see absolutely no progress in this particular region. But what President Trump showed us in the first term was that if you take certain things off the table, if you actually end up breaking with conventional wisdom, then guess what? You can accomplish goals in the Middle East, because everything we're told to believe, like all peace deals with all these different Muslim Arab countries go through the Palestinians, are actually 100% false. A perfect example of this is President Trump recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel.
In your first term, you recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital. You moved the American embassy there.
Now look, it is crazy. It is madness that president after president after president promised this on the campaign trail, and yet it took the evil orange man, President Trump, to actually deliver on this promise, especially when you realize how basic a promise it actually is. If you are aligned with the country, you should actually agree with them on where they say their capital is. Imagine if Canada told us that the capital of the United States of America is not Washington, D.C., it's actually New York City, and then conducted business with our country as if we didn't get to determine our own capital. It was a stupid policy for a very long time, and when President Trump actually ended up agreeing with the Israeli government on where their capital is, guess what? That issue of Jerusalem was removed from the table, and we were told that all these different various Arab Muslim countries would never do a peace deal with Israel because the Palestinian cause, Jerusalem was the number one thing, when in reality, these other nations have other strategic interests. In fact, the Palestinians are a liability to these countries, and this actually opened the door for the Abraham Accords, which were a bunch of bilateral agreements with Israel and Muslim countries.
And of course, you also brokered the groundbreaking Abraham Accords in which Israel made peace with 4 Arab states. We did this in 4 months. Nothing happened for a quarter of a century, but in 4 months, we were able, working together under your leadership, to have 4 historic peace accords.
And guess what? These peace deals were able to happen without the input from people in the Palestinian territories, because the Palestinian territories should have nothing to do with the bilateral agreements that Israel makes with other neighbors that are not in those territories. In fact, it ends up putting more pressure on the Palestinian territories because the way that these people operate is on the idea or the false hope that if they keep fighting, eventually they're going to overwhelm the Israelis, and they rely on a bunch of these other Muslim countries in order to say, oh, well, they're against Israel, they're supporting us in some way, and removing the support from the Palestinian cause puts pressure. Remember, the evil orange man was emphasizing that in his press conference, on these people to actually come to the table for an actual solution. Now, again, I referenced this essay a million times from Thomas Sowell. I will link it in the description. I think it is important for you guys to read it. It is called Cease the Ceasefires, and it talks about how essentially the constant ceasefires end up enabling this particular conflict. And again, if ceasefires led to peace, this would be the most peaceful region in the history of the world. But obviously, that is not the case. All it does is lower the consequences of aggression against Israel, and when you keep lowering the consequences of aggression, spoiler alert, you get more aggression. Now again, if you're with me so far, one of the things that we should agree on, or at least you should understand the argument for, is that the constant ceasefires, they don't work. They do not produce peace. The other thing that you should understand is that many of the things that are conventional wisdom about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict are just wrong, and you should also understand that not only does Hamas not care about civilian casualties, again, the governing body, if it did at this point in time, would surrender like a normal place, but they actually benefit from civilian casualties because that increases international pressure on Israel in order to not achieve their goal of removing Hamas from power. So when you acknowledge the reality of those parameters on the ground, what do you do with this information? And in my opinion, the thing that you do if you're the United States government is actually threaten Hamas in a way that they do care about. And it turns out territory might actually be something that they care about. So while I would never say that the US government should claim that they're going to take over this particular area, I would definitely signal rhetorically that I'm going to let the Israelis annex it. They're our allies. They were attacked. If we were attacked, we would want to annihilate the governing body that attacked us. See Al-Qaeda with 9/11. And I think it's perfectly fine rhetorically for the US to say that we do back the annexation of this particular territory under Israeli government. And also, we are going to find another place for these people to live for 2 reasons.
Mr. President, will you continue to press for this idea that Jordan and Egypt take Palestinians from Gaza?
Yeah, I would like to see Jordan. I'd like to see Egypt take some. Look, the Gaza thing has not worked. It's never worked. And I feel very differently about Gaza than a lot of people. I think they should get a good, fresh, beautiful piece of land, and we get some people to put up the money to build it and make it nice and make it habitable and enjoyable and make it a home.
They don't want to leave, though. Palestinians say they don't want to leave.
I don't know how they could want to stay. It's a demolition site. It's a pure demolition site. If we could find the right piece of land or numerous pieces of land and build them some really nice places with plenty of money in the area, that's for sure, I think that would be a lot better than going back to Gaza, which has had just decades and decades of death.
Now, number one, after the 67 war, the solution to this conflict would have been to put these people in Egypt and in Jordan, respectively. But unfortunately for the Israelis, they got totally outmaneuvered by these Arab nations because essentially they decided that they were going to take any of these people and keep them as perpetual stateless people in between these countries. And then all the different Arab nations in the area basically said that we're not going to give these people any kind of citizenship. They have to stay there because essentially they wanted them to become the current problem that they are for the Israelis right now. And as of right now, obviously, let's be clear about this, it is considered to be ethnic cleansing if you are to move masses of people out of a territory by force. So the Israelis obviously don't want to do that for clear reasons. We understand that. That being said, giving the people in the Palestinian territory the option somewhere to go actually makes sense. And a lot of people on the left are very angry about the prospect of an option for these people to go to a third party country, even though they describe Gaza as the largest open air prison in the world. And the reason for this is because a bunch of these different organizations actually just want these people to keep fighting and dying in this pointless war against the Israelis, because the only place that they want them to go is into Israel proper, which is obviously an unworkable solution for the Israelis. Again, if it's an open air prison, if they're being blocked off from the Egyptian side and from the Israeli side, and by the way, the Egyptians blocked them off because Hamas is considered very close to, if not the same organization, if it were in Egypt, to the Muslim Brotherhood, and they don't want the problems associated with that. But that obviously ends up contributing to this open air prison idea. So does all these other Arab nations refusing to give them citizenship or refugee status. So the proposal of the option for them to leave, I'm 100% in favor of. In terms of forcing them off the land, I don't necessarily agree with that, even though practically speaking, when two populations don't get along, separating those populations happens to be a solution that has been proven to work out throughout history. The fact of the matter is, there is just an ugliness in doing that I'm not in favor of. But again, it's not my country, it's not my area, it's not my region, and if they're ending up in that situation where that has to be necessary, that is in a long pattern of ugliness that is just normal in the history of the world.
Where would those pieces of land be?
Well,
if
they
those
could
Arab
be in
countries
Jordan,
don't want
and they
to?
could be in Egypt, and they could be in other places. You could have more than two, more than one, but you could have more than two, and you'd have people living in a place that could be very beautiful and safe and nice. Gaza's been a disaster for decades.
Would the U.S. pay for that?
I don't think the UN would pay, but I think there's plenty of people that would in the area. They have a lot of money. They certainly have a lot of money. Some of the countries over there, they'd like to see it. I know that Saudi Arabia wants to see peace. I can see that. And many of the countries there, as far as I'm concerned, they all want peace. I think, maybe I'm wrong on this, but I think Iran would like to see peace too. They've had enough. Don't you think they've had enough?
And by the way, let's be clear about this. We're having this high-minded discussion about what the Israelis should do and what's appropriate and whatnot, when in reality, if the Jews would have lost the war in 48 or lost the war in 67 or lost any of the wars for annihilation against their Arab Muslim neighbors, then their options would have been as follows: convert, die, pay that tax that you have to pay where you're a second-class citizen of an Abrahamic faith in an Islamist society, or be exiled from the country. And by the way, people who don't want the West Bank settlers in that particular territory, guess what? They want to ethnically cleanse the over 100,000 Jews from that particular area. So it's an ugly region where you have a bunch of different ugly options, but the fact of the matter is, the Israelis claim that they don't want to engage in this, so obviously it's going to look absolutely terrible if they did engage in that. That being said, the option for them to leave what has been described as an open air prison, the fact that people are against that is an absurdity on top of an absurdity, until you realize the reason they're against it is because they want them to keep fighting and keep dying in this pointless conflict.
The leaders of Egypt and Jordan have said bluntly they have no interest in doing this.
Well, they may have said that, but a lot of people said things to me. They said they wouldn't take anybody back in Venezuela, and right now they're flying them right back into Venezuela. And a lot of people, and they're doing the right thing in Venezuela. The Panama Canal is an active discussion right now. They said things about that. And virtually everything that's been said has been incorrectly stated based on the result.
Doesn't that amount to forcibly displacing? Wouldn't that amount to forcibly displacing those people from Gaza?
I don't think so. I think if they had the opportunity, they'd love them. If they had an alternative to Gaza, they have no alternative right now. I mean, they're there because they have no alternative. What do they have? It is a big pile of rubble right now. I mean, have you seen the pictures of it? Have you been there? It's terrible to live. Who can live like that?
Look, I'm sorry to break it to you guys that Santa isn't real, the Easter Bunny is also fake, and the Tooth Fairy, forget about her, doesn't exist, but these are the realities on the ground. This is the incentive structure that all the different parties in this area are dealing with. The Israelis have to remove Hamas because if they don't remove them in this particular conflict, guess what? That means that they can do basically anything, and they will never have the opportunity to do so. And for those of you who are saying, well, Hamas will just be replaced with another radical Islamist group, that's actually totally fine and totally acceptable and definitely a 100% reality, but the fact of the matter is they have to remove the organization that ended up engaging in the terror attack because that sends a message to whatever group ends up replacing them that that level of violence will not be tolerated. And again, if they don't remove them, then that sends the message to Hamas that basically they can get away with absolutely anything because again, I need to emphasize this, they do not care about civilian casualties in Gaza. In fact, they benefit from civilian casualties. So if they have to remove Hamas by threatening to take territory, something that they do care about, I'm totally game for that. Do I actually want them to take the territory? Probably not. Do I want the US government to take the territory? Hell no. Absolutely not. No way. I do not want that territory at all whatsoever. That is on the people in the region. That is their problem. That being said, I understand why it's absolutely crucial for the US to signal that we're not abandoning our allies. So everybody who says we should do a weapons embargo against our ally after they're attacked, crazy in every possible way. You don't understand foreign policy. And again, you will see consequences of that idiotic decision throughout the world when people press on our allies, run a negative PR campaign against them under the impression that they can aggress upon the United States and our allies and just fool the public into hating the ally and blaming them and essentially be able to get away with eroding US influence around the world. Whether you like Israel or not, it is considered an outpost of the West in the Middle East right now, and the fact of the matter is, we're already in this conflict. We're already there, and when people talk about the billions that are sent to Israel, let us make no mistake about it, we're talking about less than 1% of our budget. I'd rather not spend it over there. I'd rather not send money to all these different foreign countries, but we're already in the middle of this, and we have to deal with the consequences of that. And again, all these different people who call themselves pro-Palestinian, who say, oh, you know what, there should be a ceasefire. Nothing should change. There should be no consequences for losing the war. Hamas should stay in power. We should just have the status quo go on repeatedly until Israel ultimately ends up saying, come on in, guys. One state solution will be a minority in our own nation. You're just perpetuating the conflict. You are saying that your actual position is that the people describing themselves as Palestinians, the Muslims in the Gaza territory, also to a lesser extent the West Bank, which is separate from this particular conflict we're talking about right now, they should just keep dying for the cause repeatedly because you don't want them to accept reality. And in fact, you're encouraging them not to accept reality. Everybody talks about 1948 and, oh, Israel didn't exist before 1948. And by the way, as if that means anything, as if there aren't dozens of countries that were formed after that moment in time that nobody talks about. You're encouraging more of the Arab Palestinians, more of the Muslims to die in this conflict for no damn reason. We need some actual pressure. We need an actual consequence, or at least the threat of consequence, in order to produce change on the ground. And again, I will emphasize this for the 1,000th time. In no way, shape, or form do I want the United States of America to go grab Gaza. And I don't care about their Riviera. I don't care about making Mar-a-Lago Gaza edition or anything of the sort. No interest in that particular territory. However, I did see a video clip of a woman chanting that Gaza is not for sale.
Donald Trump stated the following: the United States will take over the Gaza Strip. Let's make one thing loud and clear to Donald Trump, to Netanyahu, and to the Zionist entity. Gaza is not for sale.
And make no mistake about it, crazy lady, we never offered to buy it. We offered to take it. So yeah, it's not for sale. We would just take it right off the shelf and walk out of the store, which, by the way, if that happened, you would end up supporting that person who did that theft. Now look, at this moment in time, I'm gonna open up the comments to all of you, so please tell me about how I am a secret Jewish person, I'm funded by Jewish people, and all the other nonsense that doesn't actually address the points that I made. And even better, you get bonus points for actually commenting something that I 100% did address, as if I didn't do so. As per usual, if you like this video, show me by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social medias, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about the prospect of the US taking over Gaza and how much of a hell no that is. Till next time.